All right, welcome again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samuel?
Friday, so it's Towers of Midnight. We're trudging along. We thought we could finish it pretty quick, but it's these last few chapters have been going, and we're probably going to
Yeah.
spend a good 15 minutes on comments here in the beginning because we have lots of them. Because our good friend uh, Isomorphic is back, and I guess reading again and has lots to say over the last several episodes. So we're going all the way back to episode 263. So that's where we're picking up here. Sanderson continues to make a buffoon out of Matt. He, I'm assuming that's supposed to be the way he writes him,
Mhm.
is eerily similar to the modern, quirky millennial writing. I half expected Matt to start calling people bro and dude. Yeah, and to start saying slay and, no cap. I'm almost hate reading these three novels at this point, but at least Rand is written somewhat competently, although everything does seem to be a lot more shallow. Uh, and there's several along these lines as we go through the next few videos. And I know we promised Scott we're not going to diss Sanderson too much, but I actually want to look at it, talk about it from a different angle slightly. Is Sanderson had a rough job here
Mhm.
because writing ability and being Jordan are two different things.
Yes.
It's the old saying, "Be you because no one else can be a better you." And no one can be Jordan. We're nitpicking on some of the things where I think his age and everything kind of did play into how things were, and just his personality type, how things just didn't. You should have been able to read the first 10 and be able to continue, like your
Yeah.
comment about Matt here. You should have been able to read the first 10 books and at least get closer to what it should have been.
Yeah.
Uh, so that was 263, which the episode
Well,
title.
I also think part of Sanderson's trouble with Matt is how strong, um, how strong Jordan finished him in Knife of Dreams. I mean, that really was a high point for Matt's character and Matt's storyline. And then
See, I would disagree there because I think the high point for a storyline was actually book three.
sure, but
Yeah.
as far as the culmination of that journey, it was a great climactic moment of, you know, Matt the general, Matt the ladies man, Matt the scoundrel, and it all kind of came together there at the end when he marries Tawan and when he, protects her the way he does. It was just a great climactic moment, and and so now you're handing this off to a totally different person who has to try and capture this voice
Hmm.
and has to do it following up something tremendous.
Well,
So
and I think it's he's so counter to Sanderson's personality. It would be like
yeah.
asking an ultra conservative to write a left wing progressive in a book.
Hmm.
It just there's so much miscommunication between those two sides because they just don't understand how they think.
Hmm.
They assume that everybody thinks like them, which is completely not the case. 265 is the next one. Oh, let's pause this there. Which is the new Rand and unfortunately the new Egwene. That's the
Hmm.
title of the episode. I have to disagree on the Buff Bros. Sorry, guys, I don't know your names.
We're buff
Take on
bros.
Egwene and Nynaeve. Well, I hate to break it to you. I'm what do they call it? Super medium, which is
Do you even
buff
lift,
enough to
bro?
be strong, but also, you know, when I order strength and conditioning equipment, like from Elite FTS or something, I'm technically a small or a schmedium. So I'm bigger than an average guy, not weight wise anymore, but stature wise. But that's still a small for my industry. So but I disagree with the Buff Bros. Heath and Sam are our names, by the way. I'm Sam. He's Heath. Take on Nynaeve, Egwene interaction regarding authority. I thought Egwene didn't manipulate her. She showed her what Nynaeve was doing wrong in the most considerate way possible. Maybe this depends on your overall view of the characters, considering You guys reread this, and I'm on my first proper reading. But Egwene earned a lot of goodwill with me in Knife of Dreams and Gathering Storm. I thought it was a great destruction of leadership, which you agree with.
Deconstruction of leadership.
Deconstruction of leadership, yeah, which I know you agree with, Heath, because that was like your favorite part of that
Mm-hmm.
whole sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Nynaeve was kind of getting on my nerves for a while. I feel like she long carried this insecurity of having to be right and never admitting mistakes because her authority to the Two Rivers was always a misstep away from crumbling. Edit. You are right about Nynaeve Matt Sanderson, by the way. Great comments on the bureaucracy and wannabes in regards with the Forsaken and the Third Reich.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, yeah, we both have talked about this in our in doing these videos. Is Nynaeve is completely different in the reread
Mm-hmm.
versus the first read. And I would actually, you don't have to give the exact answer, just give us whatever your generation is. But I'd be curious how old you are, isomorphic, because that might influence how you see Nynaeve and Egwene as well. Because
Mm-hmm.
our first read, I was a teenager going on young adult because we had to wait for the next one to be written each time. Uh, and Nynaeve was the kind of person that you're like, quit micromanaging me as a young male.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas now it just hits different because you
That's
see.
funny since that was your first wife. You married Nynaeve. I hadn't really thought of that before.
And now I'm married to Tuan, by the way.
You're just saying that because she's German.
Well, she's very needs to be structured and ordered.
Uh-huh.
So
It's, stereotypes are a thing because they're a thing.
yeah, but this is also from 16 years of living in the same house with her too.
Mm-hmm.
So not just stereotyping her background. Okay, so that was 265. Do you have any comments on that before I go to 267?
No, but now I'm not going to be able to help prefacing all my criticisms with Sanderson with, does Sanderson even lift, bro?
Okay, so this is 267. Perrin, Matt, and Elaine Reloaded. I don't I don't remember making that title. Oh well. I'll have to see what I was thinking when. Okay. Women need their secrets seems more like Sanderson's way of resolving this emotional knot, or rather dismissing it.
Mm-hmm.
From what I could gather, Perrin was worried about infidelity. That would still gnaw at him. I'm not sure how Jordan would resolve it himself. Probably would have Fael meet Perrin halfway, admit she felt fondness for Roland. Is this the one where we get that she kind of admits to some of
She
it?
kind of sort of admits to it, but Sanderson beats around the bush of what she actually says.
Mhm.
But she doesn't, I mean, she doesn't fully uh explain either. It seems like she doesn't fully explain the events or her feelings around it, but she does tell him more in that when they're celebrating their anniversary. It's that moment of,
Yeah.
of them celebrating their anniversary together and
Where she's
them.
basically like, you killed the guy that was protecting me, but I didn't have any
Mhm.
feelings for him. Or let me leave that part out, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's the part she kind of leaves out.
Yeah, and well, parents worry about infidelity too. This is something that I don't know if Sanderson has the relationship experience to deal with, but from the roots of jealousy, this is something time takes care of
Hmm.
because the worry for men, for the most part, it's underlying. So you can post hoc rationalize anything any other way, but the underlying factor for male jealousy is parental certainty.
Yeah.
And so enough time goes by that you can be 100% certain she's not pregnant, and that will slowly subside because you have no reason to be jealous because if if a child is made, you know it's yours because she's back now, and it's enough time has gone
But
by.
I also think for either side, uh the really dark kernel of jealousy and infidelity is doubt, because you can get over an instance, but then there's always going to be that,
That
are
she
they
did it
going to do
once,
it
she do it
again?
again. Yeah.
Yeah, is he or she going to do it again?
But
And
you see,
so,
you actually have in his head him rationalizing that when
mhm,
he says things in his own head of in the direction of, Well, I understand in the position she was in, you know.
You did what you had to do to survive. Yeah.
Yeah, she wouldn't, which underlying the undertone of that is now that she's out of that situation, she would never.
Hmm.
Uh Anything more before we go to
No.
269? All right, 269. Oh, we
Kitty.
got a couple comments here. Let me make sure the newest is first. Okay. So, what you guys talk about related to the test for Aes Sedai is all true. It would also like to point out that it doesn't just have to do with the White Tower, but strikes an innate problem with any large enough organization. No, this is true. The largest of the larger the bureaucracy, the less room there is for judgment. Judgment gets replaced with protocol. It's inevitable. Yeah, I've seen so many businesses go down this route and break apart. Home health is a big one where
Hmm.
their admin keeps growing and they have no clue what the people who actually do the work do, and it just falls apart.
Yeah, I've recently found a new YouTube channel I've been watching, and I recently binged all his videos. Habitual Line Crosser. He's a uh he's a 15-year um enlisted man in Army air defense. So he shoots Patriot batteries. Um, and he's finally getting out because he's kind of had enough of it. He was going to stay in for the full 20 but he kind of got talked out of it by some other vets who do podcasts and pointed out your content is so popular now, you could be making a lot more money if you would devote yourself to this full time rather than part time. And they kind of talked him out of it. But one of the reasons they were able to talk him out of it is what he was ranting about, which is that one of the problems with the military, and he had his sister on one of his episodes because she's enlisted in the Navy, and I think she's been in like 12 years in the Navy. And they were talking about how one of the problems is the way it's structured, the way the bureaucracy is structured, that the longer you go on, the more mediocre it becomes because the really dumb and incompetent, they get flushed out. They eventually get flushed out of now you're not advancing anymore because you're not meeting, the standards. But the really smart and capable get fed up and leave because they're constantly butting their head against this ceiling that has been put in place by the mediocre, those that are just good enough to hang on, but not smart enough and savvy enough to um to get out and do something else.
Mm-hmm.
And the military is probably the most efficient bureaucracy there is, but it's still a bureaucracy.
Okay, this is not on a Wheel of Time one, so maybe we'll save that comment.
Yeah.
This is on working out, so that
Well, we needed to talk dad bods next time anyway because we said we were going to talk about it and then we completely forgot to talk about it. So
yeah.
we can bring that up then, and because that'll probably go along with dad bodding.
Okay, so episode 273, which is the Golem's long walk on a short pier. So we always talk about how he overdoes the Swan fishing references,
Hmm.
and that was going way back to Jordan. Uh, and then I made that comment, and I was thinking about it later after I posted this, and I was like, that was something we said in Rockport. Take a long walk on a short pier is basically just take a hike, you know?
Hmm.
And I was like, I wonder if we do it all the time, and it just when it's not something you do, you read it in a book and you're like, oh, this is too much. But over the course of a lifetime, you are doing it all the time. But okay, back on this. Sanderson does write good action, but so did Jordan. Even Jordan's action is somehow deeper and more meaningful, more philosophical in a way. I always think back to Rand's duel with the Shanchan dude in The Great Hunt. Yeah, that's a good one. A great action scene mixed with a little essay on focus and flow state.
A good description of it. Yeah.
Sanderson is more shallow but slightly more detailed. Okay, so I'm not going to read all these big giant long comments. Let me pick the. Okay, yeah, I'll agree with you that the way they got rid of the Golem is clever, but it's a stretch that Matt would have been able to push him back like that. Element of surprise,
Hmm.
but yeah, you do have a point to how just ridiculously strong the golem was. But what I learned from MMA is weight does matter. If the golem was
Mhm,
the same size as Matt, he technically could have pushed that amount of weight if the guy wasn't braced to push back.
mhm.
Uh,
I also that comment makes me think about the way Sanderson writes these kinds of action scenes, and it's um one of the problems that I have heard numerous people mention, so much so that I don't know who to credit with modern movies and shows, is that it's a sequence of events rather than a story. And it's like they keep trying to capture these trailer moments. Like this is going to look really cool in the trailer. Okay, yes, but does it make sense and does it work as a story element within this bigger picture? A lot of times it doesn't. It's just events. And it almost seems like that makes me think that that's the way Sanderson writes, is that when it comes to these kinds of events, he's trying to get the trailer moment, whereas Jordan is flowing. He is flowing through just another element. Yes, it's a heightened element. It's a more exciting element. It's a more emotional element, but it's still just an element of this overarching story.
yeah, and Jordan also knew when not to overdo it because some
Mm-hmm.
of his best action sequences are
Yeah.
sequences you never saw, like Matt killing Couladin.
Mm-hmm.
You never saw that except for a couple reminiscent portions of actually the lead into that battle, not the fight itself. So your imagination can go ahead and make that as badass as you want.
And then Matt has this moment where he's actually thinking about Couladin breaking through the line like a, crazed psychopath, and then he pushes the memory away. So you don't actually see him fighting Couladin. You just
Mhm.
see how they came together in the moment of this bigger battle, and then Matt doesn't want to think about it. So
Y-
again, you're left to your own imagination.
Yeah, and one thing about Matt though that I will, it's maybe slightly secondary to what you said, but it's related, is one of my small beefs from a physiologist standpoint with Jordan was I think he did make Matt too small in stature. Because I know he's supposed to be spindly and wiry and all
Yeah.
these things. But the reason Perrin can get away with instinct is because he's pretty much bigger and stronger than everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Rand can got through some of his situations because he is basically your professional athlete size.
Mm-hmm.
He's mid 6 foot. He's got, what does Tom say in book one, an axe handle wide shoulders or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So he is actually a imposing person just physically, and add to the fact that he's been farming his whole life, so he's probably,
Then you add in the
retard strength on
power.
top of it.
You add in the one power, and he's basically Perrin when it comes to the one power of bigger and stronger than everyone else he meets.
Yeah, and Matt is, you brought up the juggling. Uh, Matt is more coordinated and smooth than the other two. Like you said, the flow state. Rand's fight with Turok was a very controlled flow state. It was I practiced this so much that these fixed patterns are natural for me. Where Matt is a flow state where this is the environment around me, and he, as when he was written well, I just do the best I can. These are all the inputs I'm getting, and I'm just going to do the best I can with that. So two different kinds of flow state,
Mhm.
but size does matter. Like you said, pushing the golem through the hole, but also, if a Trolloc was to fight him, yeah, you can finesse your way so much, but if he crashes an axe down on you, you're not going to block it with that Ashendera if you're
A-
not at least Perrin,
And you
right?
see that in Galad's scenes in the big battle against the Trollocs. Is that's a good example because Galad has that same natural coordination and ability when it comes to the sword that Matt has with the staff. But when that big honking Trolloc comes crashing in and not only knocks into him, but kills his horse and knocks his horse over, right? So this is a monstrous monster, and there's nothing Galad can do except try not to get his leg broken.
Yeah, I'll give you a good example of where the finesse character was done right because of stature. That's a Game of Thrones. The
Mm,
Viper, whatever his name was.
yeah.
against the Mountain. Yeah, the Mountain was way bigger and stronger, but and he did finesse that fight. But the guy's actually more imposing in stature than the average dude.
Yes.
He's just small compared to the Mountain, right? So it
Well, and
was
I think that gets lost sometimes with Matt though, because he is that way. He is bigger than average.
if you go by the Jordan numbers, he's basically average height and skinny.
Um, well, because there's that moment with Melindra when he's thinking to himself annoyedly that he can remember when he was considered tall, because in Randland, in the wetlands, he is tall. It's just when he's around all these Aiel, he's short.
I wonder if this is like Abraham Lincoln days where wasn't Lincoln not super tall, but he was so much taller than everybody else. Uh,
No, Lincoln
but
was actually tall. Same with Washington. They were both over 6 foot.
uh,
So they would even be tall today, although not toweringly so like they were.
uh, I think Jordan himself listed him at around 5'10".
Mhm.
So I mean, you're looking at half an inch more than average, but at least someone my size. Like I said, the super medium's is there for a reason because most of your special forces
Mm,
are what we call that super medium,
mhm.
because it's just the right big enough to be strong enough to be effective in combat, but just the right small enough that you can go through uh, periods of deprivation if
Yes,
you needed to. So that's kind of how I pictured them, like your standard special forces. But if you look at the numbers Jordan threw out,
it
it's a
doesn't
lot
fit
less
very
than
well.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Um,
Uh,
yeah, I agree with
chapters.
that sentence.
Iteral's chapters were a treat to read. Yes, it was
Mhm.
a great build. And one little gripe is that I remember when I was reading Luce Theron seizing control from Rand in The Knife of Dreams. I was so amazed by how Jordan took the tools we were accustomed to and used them in innovative ways, like the killer gates.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mhm.
We will see, and we get a tease of it here in one of the chapters we're going to get to and I don't know how much of this is from the notes, but we do get a tease of that of new and interesting ways to use weaves,
Mhm.
specifically with the gateways. Um,
Episode 275, which is Parents' Trial. Okay. People often, oh, you wrote a shorter one. All right. People often confuse the easy, hard category with simple, complicated category, don't they? And he puts to the diet and fitness remarks. Yeah.
yeah, just because something is simple doesn't mean it. Look at, I was griping about modern storytelling and writing and shooting for the, it's going to look cool in the trailer rather than the, a good story. And uh it made me think of, there's nothing wrong with following a formula. So I don't know if you know this, the channel Call Me Chato. He's a,
Never even heard of it.
he's a Canadian guy. Oh geez, what is it? You remember the skit Boot to the Head,
Yeah.
Taekwon
Yeah.
Leap?
Yep.
He was part of that group.
Okay.
So he was part of a sketch comedy group in Canada, and he's done TV, and he was an executive for a while. He was like the head executive in charge of, I think, like comedy for the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. And so that's the spin he brings to his channel is, what would an executive do? How do I look at this through the lens of being an executive? Like, one of the things he does is he'll take the first episode of something, like the first his review of the first episode of oh, brain fart, the Netflix live action of the anime Luffy,
One Piece.
One Piece. And so his review of the first episode wasn't a review of the episode in the traditional sense. It was green light or not. If you showed this to me as a pilot and I'm the executive, would I have greenlit this, and why or why not? But he talks about this of, guys, there's a reason that sitcoms have worked for as long as TV has been around, literally. And they all follow the same formula. The trick is to follow the formula without being formulaic. And it's a difficult trick. It's not easy, but it's also not complicated. We have a formula, it works. Now, how do we make it interesting enough and put our own spin on it so that we can keep it going for a while, so that we can keep the interest of the viewer? And I think that is why Jordan is so successful, is because if you look through the overarching story, the amount of plot threads, the amount of characters, we're overthinking all this because there's so much detail in here. But when you
Hmm.
boil it down, he's really following a lot
Hmm.
of basic traditional storytelling formula. He's just putting an interesting spin on it. He's putting his own, unique way of looking at it and doing things.
Sounds like making, speaking of diet and fitness, a long-term fitness plan. The nuts and bolts are the same, but you kind of make it look different so you stay
Mm-hmm.
interested. Okay, so this is 277. This is the last one we put up. No, not the last one. Second to last one we put up for Wheel of Time. Don't know, bros. I think Godwin Epiphany excuses everything. It's a breath of fresh air. Everyone wants to lead. We want. Oh, okay. So this is where we were talking about uh when he finally comes around, it's too little, too
Mm-hmm.
late. But
Yeah, yeah.
he disagrees that it's not. It's actually a good moment.
Well, I
Um,
was
yeah.
I may not have expressed myself as well as I was trying to, because this was one of those moments to me, a lot of like the Perrin moments that we've talked about and partly criticized, but partly praised, which is that um in a this is one of those scenes that in a vacuum, it is a pretty good scene. Galwin's epiphany, Galwin's, change of heart, change of character. The problem is that it fell a little flat because of all the crap we'd had to put up with beforehand. I don't think it was sufficient to cover everything that had come before. In a vacuum, it was a pretty good scene. It was a pretty good explanation for why Gawain was doing what he was doing and now why he's shifting and having a change of heart. So in that sense, it was good because it didn't just come out of nowhere. If I'm going to be a good guy now, what? Huh? When did this happen? But I didn't think it was sufficient. It was like 70 to 80% at best there.
Next comment, 11620. Apparently he
You're
thanked us
welcome.
for
Whatever it was, you're welcome.
I'm curious what it was. 11629. Oh,
What?
that's the day I had to leave the office because oh, I didn't share with sound. Oh well. Oh, whatever it is, you're welcome. I'll listen
Yeah.
to it later and I will give a true you're welcome maybe in the comments. Okay, now we're on last week's episode. There's lots of comments on that one. Let me make sure they're in order here. Okay. So Scott says, "How can you be sure Sanderson wrote the hammer scene?" We can't. We can't. I think he was chomping on the bits to write it, though.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
just from the style that it's in, you can't help that he inserted some of his own fervor for that.
Yes. Yes. There's a scene in today's chapters where I had that thought of this sounds like Sanderson. I think he wrote all or most of this scene.
Yeah, but Jordan
Um,
had
but
notes.
it feels like a
Yeah.
Jordan chapter. So I think this was either heavily noted or it's the scene where Perrin and Fail finally sit down with Elaine to hash out what they're going to do about the two rivers, and it it feels very much like Jordan, but it sounds like when I read it in my head, it sounds like Sanderson. It sounds more like his style. So I don't know how much of it was notes and how much of it was he got Perrin better than he got anyone else. And so this moment was probably a lot easier for him to write than some of these other moments.
Okay. There is nothing quite as satisfying for a man as having a heavy hammer. Yeah, I like my sledgehammer, but I don't know, chainsaw's fun too.
Yep, yep.
I appreciate you bros doing this. Having someone confirm my dissatisfaction with Sanderson actually helps me get it out of the way and focus on things he did right and enjoy the novels more. We're
Yeah.
trying to focus on that. We really are. But it's a big ask to kind of sock you back to where we started here. It's a
Hmm.
big ask to come in after someone who's created something with such a huge, not just following, but devoted, almost a cult following, the way it was as the books were being written. Like you told the audience about how you got interested in the books because of how interested me and all the other Parkerites were
Hmm.
about the books. Just sitting there for hours talking about it in the lounge, you were like, well, maybe I should read this so I can be part of the conversation. Uh, but another a good example of this is if anybody's watched the Spartacus series, it was 2 seasons of
Hmm.
the original actor, and he passed away of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma in between 2 and 3, and 3 was going to be the final season. And they decided to finish it with a new actor. He didn't do a bad job, but
It just wasn't the same.
I
Yeah.
couldn't help but be like, he's not this guy. He's not Spartacus.
Yeah.
I can't get over every scene where I'm like, who's this new guy? Oh yeah, that's supposed to be Spartacus. You know, so it's a tough follow. You can do the best job possible, and people will still hold you in that comparison because nobody can be the same you. Nobody can be Robert Jordan,
Hmm.
and that's the I guess the big takeaway there. I feel bad for people who are in that situation. We're nitpicking. Realistically, I'm trying to only do it when it's something that I'm like, you should have known better from the first 10 books, not from a standpoint of, well, you just have a different style.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, there were a few more comments. You close that off before we get
Oh,
to
did
them.
I?
Yeah, there were several more up there.
Oh, that's right. I just scrolled down too far. Okay.
Yeah. So, uh, I do like the comment about yeah, the Tower White Cloak stretch is written well. You know, kudos to Sanderson for that. A lot of our gripes there were more gripes that pre-existed these books, pre-existed the Sanderson books. Um, by what jumps out to me about this comment was his point about as the series stretched and stretched, you I know there was griping in the fan community at the time where you felt like or you're just trying to milk this story for more pages, more sales. And I never felt like that. I always felt like as much as I want to get to the end and see the end, I also want a satisfying story. And I do agree with isomorphic here that yeah, even where you're a little dissatisfied because the story has stretched so much and gotten so big, I never felt like Jordan was trying to milk it. It was just oh geez, how do I bring this all back together in a satisfying and logical way that flows with the story.
Hmm.
And then the next comment, I like your point about the parallels between Perrin having the two of his archers draw and hold and fire over the white cloaks and Barrelane kind of freaking out, and the parallel there with Rand holding the key and thinking about destroying Ibudar, and yeah, Barrelane does know men, or uh, she knows men like Rand, or rather, what power was pushing Rand to become before his epiphany. Logical, yes, but cynical and ruthless. But Perrin is a different man from Rand, and when it came to that moment, there was no inner struggle because Perrin had different challenges altogether, which is a good point and why the characters work so well because you can see the parallels, you can draw analogies, but they're still different, they're still distinct.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, they're a tripod, Rand,
Mm-hmm.
Perrin, and Matt. And I think Perrin represents kind of a groundedness. Like I will never forget my roots kind of part that Rand distanced himself from everybody, and especially from his roots. He didn't go to the two rivers on purpose in book 4
Hmm.
because he didn't want to put them in more danger because
Yeah.
it would let the shadow know he cared that much.
Hmm.
Where Perrin couldn't help but go because those are my roots. I take care of my peoples.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Matt is grounded, but he also distances himself. But he's also that flow state, that accepting of his environment, that Rand is so overly ordered and Perrin is so overly ordered. So they all represent something different. One is the I will represent my roots no matter what.
Hmm.
One is I am basically the bulwark between the most evil and the world itself. And the other is I just kind of react to my situation and do the best I can.
Hmm.
Yeah. Uh,
I really like this point about the difference between land and the boys, and I hadn't really thought about it in these terms before, but the Tavarin idea as a literary device, I like the idea that that is there. Where is it? Um, So they can afford to tell people who want to follow them to F off multiple times with no repercussions. Also, that Jordan could demonstrate through them that power does not have to be only about a lust for it. There is honor in it when you assume responsibility. Great point. And that's why that device works, because there is the contrast with the people who are lusting after wanting the power, and then the boys, when they finally assume authority, they're assuming it to take responsibility. And I also like the contrast here. This is a great way of framing why the Lan arc bothers me as well. Is imagine if Elaine was acting like Lan did. It wouldn't make any sense and it
mhm,
wouldn't work. And she couldn't tell people to F off because they would, and then she'd be screwed. So why does Lan continue to get away with it? Okay, yes, he's the last king of not Manethor and Malkir and whatever, but at some point people are going to say, all right, well, fine. If you want me to F off, see ya. You're on your
mhm,
own. And he should understand because he's the one who taught the boys this, especially Rand, of, you know, duty is heavier than a mountain, and your duty is to lead these people. And so, yeah, it after one or two instances, you know, of I'm on my own, the result should have been, all right, F it, buddy. We're going to the last battle with all these guys. And yeah. And so that's a good point of when you finally get to the scene, there'd been maybe if there were just a couple of fewer scenes, cut out a few of those scenes or tweak them as we talked about so that Lan is thinking about he's already on his way to okay, but what is my duty? Is my duty to fight the shadow or is my duty to lead these people who need to be led?
mhm. Yeah, and that's I think you get it's kind of a form of audience capture in the fact that all the heroes people love are the ones that are reluctant heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And we see with Matt, he was the reluctant leader.
Mm-hmm.
Perrin's the reluctant leader. Rand at first was a reluctant leader and then he becomes a tyrant.
Mm-hmm.
But uh that trope is like, oh, well, we'll make Lan unlikable
Yeah.
if he
Yeah.
just takes his power and goes, right? So it's the only characters from a certain point, it might be pre-Sanderson, the only characters that actually embrace their authority are the bad ones. They're the baddies.
Yeah.
And
Are
so
we the
it's
baddies? Yes, you are.
so it almost kind of traps you in that position of not wanting to make Lan one of the baddies.
Hmm.
But those of us that are more than first order thinkers are going, yeah, but that's not like where what he would do if in real life.
All right. Well, there we are, finally done with all the comments, and so
I
now
said
we
15 minutes and we're probably what on an hour?
yeah close to it.
Yeah. I think it was a George Lopez bit on uh his his experience with people on the everything is 15 minutes. He's specifically talking about Hispanic people from LA. He's like, everything's 15 minutes. You can't get from one part of LA to another in 15 minutes, but everything is, hey, what, how do I get here? Oh, it's 15 minutes. Everything is 15 minutes, even if it takes you 2 hours.
Yep.
So that's the way we roll. 15 minutes and we're
All right. Well, on to the actual chapters, but let's pause for a second real quick. All right. Little hiccup there, thanks to my idiotic internet. Let's power through before it craps out again. Um, we're on chapter 44, which is 652 in the first edition hardcover here. I don't have a ton of notes on these chapters because a lot of this stuff is either kind of resolution of stuff that we've already kind of talked about, or it's setting stuff up that, I mean, there's no point in getting too deep into it until stuff starts to happen. But the first couple of chapters here are dealing with Elaine, and it's Perrin and Fail and Morgase and Galad coming to Camelin, and then the reunion of that, then plus the okay, now what do we do about the two rivers? Um, the first thing to kind of jump out at me here in this first section, which is from Morgase's point of view, is as she's walking along, and on page 654 here, she looks at Fail, and there's kind of some awkwardness there. And actually, I don't think it was 654. I think I wrote the wrong page down here. Where is it? Um, where she has this thought of there's a rift between them, and Morgase was sorry that that had happened. There was a rift between the two of them now. Morgase wished it could be otherwise. And I just had this thought of this is where we really could have used some different point of views during that Shido
mhm.
captivity, to really hammer that home, and to really internalize that for the reader to be able to feel that rather than feel like you're on the outside looking in, which is why Jordan's style works so well the way it does, is because you're actually behind this individual's eyes, you're in their head, and so it it personalizes it more. Well, we never really got it personalized because we only ever saw it from Fael's point of view.
Yeah, and this is a failure to communicate, which he actually does a really good job of giving a pretty female perspective on this
Mm-hmm.
from her eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Because everybody talks about women are better communicators, but it's actually what situation, how, why. And what they aren't is very good communicators about their social tensions
Mm-hmm.
and with each other, with other females. This could easily have been a conversation where Morgay says, "I'm sorry, but
Mm-hmm.
I had to." And we know from Fail's own thoughts was she felt betrayed, but she understood.
Mm-hmm.
And they could say that to each other.
So,
And it'd be
so
like, "Oh, well,
presumably they very easily could have mended this rift if they
yeah."
just would have tried.
But it was actually very well
Yeah.
written because in real life, women do tend to do that, have these internal
Mm-hmm.
ruminating thoughts instead of communicating it with each other.
Um, then we switch to Perrin's point of view. Um, well, before there, the end of uh Morgase's point of view is her finally saying, "Gosh darn it, let's get married." Or, as she says down on the bottom of page 655, Talonvor says, "But what of duty? Duty can bloody get in line. It's had its share of me. Everyone's had their share of me, Talonvor. Everyone but the man I want." That would have been, again, back to the where we could have used some more point of view in during the Shido captivity, especially with Morgase, because Morgase became pretty unlikable for a while there. And you understood it, again, back to understanding, even if you don't like it, you understood it because of the pressure she was under and the lack of information. She fled Camelin thinking that Gabriel just was just this master manipulator, and she had just gotten too emotional to see and do what needed doing, not knowing or understanding, no, this is a Forsaken and you're under heavy compulsion. So it was understandable why she was doing what she was doing, but it still made her pretty unlikable. And we could have used some point of view of her during the Shido captivity to really regain some reader sympathy and respect for her, so that moment there would have had more impact if you would have been rooting for Morgase the woman.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I do like when it switches to,
Well, I mean, when we talk about over the top Matt,
yeah.
uh, over the top Lenny here, because she's been through too much. You
Hmm.
know, Morgase, the comeback was, I'm not 18 anymore for Morgase. And she said, if you were, yeah, when you were 18, you were married proper. But this Lenny would have been proper at 18. This Lenny now, I mean, she's been through two marriages and a suitor in front of everybody.
Hmm.
And all the everything along in that direction. And it's like, okay, your actions here are like properly done in Robin Hood Men in Tights when was it Helga was was lording over the princess, but she's no
Or
longer the
Spaceballs and the Virgin Alarm.
yeah, the virgin alarm. Yeah, the that makes sense in that situation, but this Lenny doesn't make sense anymore. It's
Yeah, that didn't even really jump out at to me because I was just kind of moving along. But that's a good point, because when we first meet Lenny, we have heard about her plenty. We have been hearing about her since probably, I think, the Great Hunt, when Elaine first brings her up and references her while she's in the tower. And then we finally meet her in either Fires of Heaven or Lord of Chaos. Can't remember where it is, where she finally leaves. It's got to be Fires of Heaven, because they go after Ravine at the end of Fires of Heaven. When she finally leaves Camelin, and she is acting like this, but it is much more subtle.
Mhm.
It is a much drier humor, because she's still being respectful of the queen. And then even when they leave and she's a little more open, because Morgase is still the queen, but she's not on her throne, she's still not this over the top. That's a good point about, you know, writing the comedy over the top.
Well, and it's also just caricature on a modern person's take on kind of that era of
Hmm.
history. People kissed before they were married all the time, even back then.
Hmm.
You kiss people you're interested in, and you go through many interested people before you find the person that you're most interested in. This I'm demanding you marry just because you kissed is a caricature on that whole time period, not just
Yeah,
on
that's
Lenny
true.
herself. So it's I think it's a misunderstanding now. People put this label of the old school patriarchy, and you can't show an ankle or you're married now. So it's a little over the top.
What about with Perrin's scene? So on page 659, um, Morgase, we're in Perrin's point of view here, and Morgase comes up with the whole crew, um and says, "So I suppose you will do. This man has asked my hand in marriage. Will you perform the ceremony for us?" "You have a backhanded way of asking for my help, Morgase," Perrin said. The woman narrowed her eyes at him, and Fail looked at him and smelled angry as well. Perrin sighed. Fight among themselves though they might, they were always eager to pounce on a man who said the wrong thing, even if it was the truth. I feel like that works better because he writes Perrin better. It's the simplicity of Perrin being Perrin. So there doesn't feel like an over the topness to it, to me.
Yeah, no, I thought that was decently well written. Yeah, I don't know if it's because he knows Perrin better. I think he just knows that situation better.
Mm.
Perrin's fight with the fame kind of thing. Uh, yeah, go ahead and go on. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. Well, no, his analysis of women there is okay because we did this in our Caitlin Clark episode, right?
uh-huh.
Which was they can't be shown to stand out unless they're competing against a man. in
Mm.
something. And it's like the sociality of women. I just gave one of the downfalls in the previous comments we were talking about with they don't communicate well together, but they also are very good at coalition against something that's seemingly taking advantage of them, which Perrin here as the being gruff and realistically kind of rude in that statement.
Yeah. Yeah,
Uh,
I did think the end of this was a little, that part works, but then the end of it I think goes a little too over the top, which is he coughed. Well, so be it then. You're married. uh that I mean, that to me seemed to Isomorphic's point about kind of the millennial-esque humor
mhm.
of the way he writes. That to me didn't work. That seemed forced and a little turning Parrot into a caricature of himself.
Well, I mean, actually, it depends on which himself you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because if are you talking about the gruff, kind of simple natured person? Okay, maybe caricature of that. But are you talking about the parent that dotes over his wife? Of all the characters in of the tripod that would respect marriage the most, it would be him.
Yeah, and maybe that's why it doesn't work is because, I mean, at the beginning of this, he says, how do you want this done? I only know the Two Rivers way, and we've seen the Two Rivers wedding ceremony at least in part, and it wasn't like that. So there could have should have been a little bit more, even if it was Perrin being gruff and awkward. That rather than just, oh well, I guess you're married now. That to me is veering towards Perrin as Lenny territory. Um, More importantly though, it dawned on me after the fact of, and after Fail leaves and rightly says you can, the ceremony can be skimped if needed, but the celebration should not be skimped, particularly at times like this. Absolutely. That's why she's there for you, Perrin, because you understand, the gruff, the need for keep busy, keep the eye on the task, keep people motivated, don't let them dwell on these scary things. But she's right in the, but you also have to have the carrot, not just the stick. Um, for most other people, the stick works fine for you because that is your mentality. But normal people, they need an excuse to celebrate, especially in times like this.
Hmm.
And then we finally get one of the reunions with the boys, although not all three of them together, which is annoying. Um, and it dawned on me after the fact of I went through these last couple of pages where you finally get the reunion with Matt, and I don't have a single note on it, which I think says more than an actual note would. I don't know. It was too sudden, too out of the blue. To wait, what's going on? I remember the first time I read it, going, "Wait, what? What's going on here?" And having to back up a second and then go,
When
"Matt,
it's
that's
also a
it."
baby Yoda moment too with the catching badgers. Oh,
Mhm.
people love the badgers from book one. Let me bring some badgers back.
I feel like the scene would have worked better if he hadn't actually caught a badger. Like,
Yeah, if it was just a little joke about the past or
yeah,
something. Yeah.
let's go catch a badger and release it on the village green. Or even, I mean, for crying out loud, he's snooping around. He would have just seen what happened here, even if he wasn't close enough to hear it, and is smart enough to intuit what was going on there of, let's go catch a badger. And we're not releasing it on the village green in the middle of the wedding celebration, just because it'll be funny. But the actually having caught a badger, and then I'm super Matt and I just snuck in here and nobody noticed. And now I'm just going to sneak off while the gateway's open and nobody's going to notice.
Hmm.
It just felt so very contrived. Uh, and then we get a bit of a longer scene later, but it's still, I don't know, it didn't really work for me. And I feel like maybe the reason the later scene doesn't work is because this scene was so contrived and silly, and not silly fun in a good way, but like clown silly. All right. Um chapter 45 is Elaine's point of view and blah 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 stuff. Um, but then when Brigitte brings Galad and Morghese in, um, this is actually a pretty good scene. I think he writes Elaine well here, of Elaine, the woman, the daughter, and doesn't go over the top with the I'm an emotional pregnant woman. It's the right amount of emotion. I think it works. Um, One of the things that did jump out at me here that I found interesting that maybe could have used a little more time to develop because we don't really see it much going forward is on page 671. You have this nice moment where uh where her and Galad sit down to to share news to okay, what's been going on, something that not nearly enough people actually do. Um and she has this thought of um where is it? Yeah, so Galad took that as a request. He could be very literal and began explaining how he'd come by his station, blah blah blah. Um, Conversing with Galad was often like this, an exchange more formal than familiar. Once it had frustrated her, but this time she found that, against her better wishes, she'd actually been missing him. So she listened with fondness. That's actually a nice moment of growth with Elaine. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the reason it works is because what she doesn't realize, but maybe intuits, is that Galad is being for her what she just got done telling Galwin he needed to be for Egwene.
Mm-hmm.
Someone that can talk to her directly and you know still respect the station but not be overwhelmed by the station, someone that she can trust wholeheartedly because she knows however much she may dislike Galad personally, that if he says this is what is, then that is what is,
Mm-hmm.
because that's the kind of person he is. And she knows that if he says I'm going to do this thing, he's going to do that thing.
Yeah,
And so
and it's so in contrast with what she has to deal with in her other life, which is the tower,
mhm,
uh, where with an oath of only telling the truth, they find a way to lie, right?
mhm, yep. um there was another good moment here. So in the next page, in her interaction with Morghese, where she clearly doesn't like Rand and doesn't like the fact that he is the father of her grandbabies. Um, on page six, the top of page 672, um, Rand Althor, Morghese said, her mood darkening. That mother, Elaine said, raising a hand to grasp hers. He's a good man and I love him. What you have heard is an exaggeration or bitter rumor, blah, blah, blah. Um, but he's Elaine, a man who can channel the dragon reborn. And I really like this line. And still a man, Elaine said, feeling his knot of emotions in the back of her mind, so warm. Just a man for all that is demanded of him. And it made me realize one of the problems, not only with Egwene, but with the storyline of the three girls that start out together and then branch apart and are supposed to come back together, but because of what's going on with Elaine, just kind of logistically, there is never that moment of reunion between these two friends. There is between Nynaeve and Egwene really needed that, and Nynaeve needed that. To Isomorphic's point about that interaction between Egwene and Nynaeve kind of needed that to finish her growth as a person, to finish getting past her past, so to speak, and becoming the Aes Sedai that she needs to be in this moment and going forward. That really needed to happen with Elaine and Egwene as well. And in large part because of this, because there is that nice moment when Rand confronts Egwene and Egwene realizes, wait, no, I can't just be the Emerald here. It's not an accident that the pattern brought Amarilyn and Dragon Reborn together, and they happen to grow up together as close friends and almost betrothed. So this isn't an accident. I need to remember Rand the man, Rand the person I know, and is supposed to be my friend. But she doesn't do a very good job of doing that. And I think that's what Elaine was maybe supposed to be, is to Elaine as one of Rand's lovers to remind Egwene that, hey, he's just a man. No, he makes mistakes. Yeah, because he's just a man, but he's doing the best he can considering what's being demanded of him. There's also kind of a parallel there with Avienda that we're gonna that I thoughts I had when we get to her brief point of view moment here in a second. Um, but that is also where Avienda comes in as a friend to Egwene. They are apprentices together after they have met each other and had this moment of bonding um in books 3 in the beginning of book 4 in the stone. But then again, they separate and they never really come back together. And I think that is maybe to the point, to, earlier when we were talking about the comments about how the book stretched out and the story seemed to just get bigger and bigger and almost seemed to get away from Jordan's ability to control it. That maybe that was what was supposed to happen, that was why these storylines originally came together, why these girls met before they even, knew what their destiny was, let alone began to realize that destiny, is Rand needed these women. He needed their help. And then Egwene, as the one who is going to become Amarillion, needed those confidants, those you know, what Elaine just realized Galad had become, is someone I can trust because I know this person intimately. I know how they think and why they think the way they do.
That's one of the differences between real life and like reading a book, because we're seeing fate play out as it was set up.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in real life, you kind of just post hoc justify everything that happened.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to look back because I mean you don't know these details because
Mm-hmm.
that's real life. Um, but speaking of Avienda, we go right to her now on page 674. We switch back to Avienda, who's sitting up on the hills overlooking Ruidine and contemplating all this. And she has this interesting thought that is a nice moment of growth, but it doesn't land because Avienda was, and again, this is back to a criticism of Jordan because, yeah, Sanderson doesn't write her great. And he admitted that she was one of the characters he had trouble with. But to his credit, Jordan didn't leave him nearly as much to work with as he did the other characters.
Mm-hmm.
She has this thought here on page 674 of she didn't want to acknowledge these questions. She wanted to continue with tradition. Yeah, that's Avienda. That's her character. That's who she was from when we first met her. Um, but this is why we needed more from Avienda, because on the next page, she thinks that uh, she, she comes to the realization that traditions should not be maintained just because they were traditions. Strength was not strength if it had no purpose or direction, which is essentially what the scene with Nakomi brought her to, was that, well, the tradition of Toe, but we've met our Toe, so why are we going to continue to punish ourselves in the threefold land? That would be trying to, continue to meet Toe. That would be like the guy Shane who no longer want to give off the white, will no longer want to take it off. You've met your Toe. Now you're just making a mockery of the whole system. So, but that shouldn't have been a revelation of a page, but of many books. But we don't really get that growth because we get so few point of view scenes from
Well, like you
Avienda.
said, that's what Nakomi was for, just to fast forward us to the revelation.
Yeah, and you can. One of my thoughts was you can look back on some of those point of view scenes that we do get with her time with Elaine, and you can kind of see it, and much the same way that we talked about, like the turn of Daenerys at the end of Game of Thrones. It's not that it came out of nowhere. You can look back at things she did over the previous seasons and say, well, this is how we get there. But
Well,
doing that,
this is a disagreement I have with most Game of Thrones fans, because they're like, "Oh, it turned in the last season or episode," and I'm like, "You saw it the whole time."
well, See that, but that's my point though. You saw it, you didn't know it. See, because you couldn't internalize it and make it personal because the setup wasn't deep enough. It wasn't real enough, so to speak. When you see one of the reasons we praise Nynaeve now on these rereads and as we've gotten older and respect her more is because you understand her growth. You understand her change. It's not from the outside looking in. It's from inside Giggity. It's from inside her own mind. And
Well,
so,
I think the reason I it didn't surprise me in what happened in Game of Thrones was the times she was bad, she was doing it quote unquote for the right reasons. When
mhm,
she burned those slavers alive, even though they came through with their part of the deal, and
mhm,
there was actually no reason to do it other than they were the baddies. So she was allowed to just burn them alive. That to me was already the flag that she's an authoritarian tyrant that's going to take over once
yeah,
it behooves her. And when it she twists at the end, as people think, I was like, that wasn't a surprise. You saw like 10 circumstance where she was doing the tyrant thing. Only it was against the other bad people. So you were cool with it. You were cool with the bad acts because it was on the bad people,
yes,
which lets you know
but
how the Covidians went.
because she was doing it for the right reasons, because she always thought she was doing good and was genuinely trying to do good, it that's why I say you could see it coming, but most people wouldn't see it coming. You would have to look back and post hoc justify it and say, well, here's how we got here. These are the steps along the way. Whereas you should have seen it coming because there should have been a continual move down to this dark
Hmm.
point. In much the same way that there should have been a continual growth up to this point of light and revelation for Avienda, and you can kind of look back and post hoc justify it, but it's not very satisfying because we didn't really get to experience the journey with Avienda along the way.
Yeah, and of the real Big Ten in these books, she's probably the least fleshed out.
Mm-hmm.
Because you got the big three boys, you got the big three girls. Well, no, there's more than the big three girls because it depends on the circle. You got Nynaeve,
Mm-hmm.
Egwene, and Elaine, but Elaine, Avienda, and Min as another
Mm-hmm.
tryst. So, but yeah, I don't know if we're supposed to get the idea that basically if we knew her culture, which we got lessons on that in book 4, then we would know her. And if that's the backdrop, then this revelation makes sense because she's realizing that I am a I am a product of my culture, not of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and when you look at cultures, the threefold land is important in this because the most rigid traditional systems are where the stakes are the highest because one misstep could be death. So you over time your people, your culture, you created a heuristic for surviving in this specific situation. And so culture in those kind of places are really weighs heavy because you're discouraged by deviating from that heuristic with probably dying. Not just a little discomfort or you didn't make a bill here or there like we deal with. It's you're done.
All right, chapter 46. This chapter annoys me. Um, where I want. Let me start with the good because there are a couple of good points here. So we meet a new character named Androl who is in the Black Tower, and he's not very strong, but he has this odd talent, capital T, with gateways. So he can do incredible things with gateways, even though in terms of raw power, he's one of the weaker people there. Um, but I like the opening of this where he's crafting something. He's a leather worker, and there's this thought on page 678. There was a tranquility to this kind of work. And this whole section, these first several pages of this chapter, is Jordan/Sanderson showing us what Cadsuin and Logain had told us about the need for the Ashaman to be men, not just tools. And he's actually showing us why this is important, because you see from behind his eyes, yeah, this is what this kind of work does for a man. You know, the to Isomorphic's point about there's just something good about having a big heavy hammer in your hand as a man. It's I'm gonna get a thing done. Gosh darn it. And it's, that's what Enderal is doing here is, I got a thing to do. It needs to be done, and following these steps and having a thing come out on the end that is fully formed and good is tranquil. It calms the mind. Um, and then over
Yeah,
the
but
next couple of
I
pages.
think the annoying part about this is though we've already seen this a few times with Perrin.
Mhm,
He basically just rewrote the Perrin in the
mhm.
Forge scenes with
That's
leather.
that's one of the problems with it, but there's a bigger problem here because on page 680 and 681, listening to seeing his thoughts and then hearing the things he actually says out loud, I'm wondering if this character was always supposed to be some random dude, because he talks and thinks like Tam. And when you get hints of his backstory, there are elements of similarities there with Tam's backstory of someone who left his small town and went off into the great big world and had these life-changing moments. But because of the logistics of the storyline, it it would be incredible if this was Tam instead of some random dude. But it really wouldn't work because there's no way Taim would just leave Rand's father alone,
Hmm.
stepfather or no. There's no way he would be allowed to just go under the radar like this, because he is too useful of a tool, a pressure point to use against Rand. But my biggest problem with this chapter is that it's some random new guy who comes out of absolutely nowhere and is going to become a very important part to a major storyline that goes from here to the end of the series. The what's going on in the Black Tower is a major plot point. It has been. We've been hinting at it for books now,
Hmm.
and now we're finally seeing what's actually going on. And so this has to be resolved, and Andoril is going to be kind of the pivot point from around which we see this storyline. And I just really don't like that it's just some random dude who comes out of nowhere. I
Hmm.
really feel like this should have been one of the Two Rivers men, not one of the young men, but one of the Two Rivers men. I mean, it would be hard to do, but could you imagine if this was like Sin, and we see the cantankerous old man and we see this kind of shift in his character as he now has to be a leader to stick up for the Two Rivers men, young men, the lads, but then also, to stick up for them, but then also to guide them, not
Hmm.
just protect them, and also to, kind of help against this bigger moment. Or, someone else, like I'm brain farting on his name, but the guy who's the miller. We've seen him, Thane, John Thane. He's a member of the council, and we've seen him before. You know, this could have, and I think should have been one of the men, the older men that we've already met from the Two Rivers.
Hmm.
And that is what makes this whole storyline almost fall flat for me. It doesn't completely fall flat because we still have, you know, Amarin, who we've met before. We still have Logain as part of the story. We still have Pavar as part of the story, and we've met her before, and she's, had a lot of screen time, so we get to know her. Um, but it just
We had set up that you could have made it a Two Rivers person, maybe not one of the already established men,
mhm,
but we have Taim going to the Two Rivers for
mhm,
recruitment, and it could have been someone that actually gets trashed on a little bit or something earlier, like Will Alcine, the pretty boy, one of those kind of things. But he still got even though he was an outlier in the Two Rivers compared to the rest of the world, he's still
mhm.
down to earth and, grounded. So he could, you could have easily had somebody that was recruited from the Two Rivers. be
Mhm.
part of that.
Well, and we see some of the Two Rivers guys here, which is what makes me think of it, because the Two Rivers lads, they become an integral part of Loghain's faction. In fact, he's making this archery bracer for one of the young Glads who we have met before, Daughtry. We know him and we know his grandfather. We have, seen them or had them referenced in passing before.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the reasons these scenes work with the Two Rivers lads, is because we do get, you know, in the same way that we got that call back to the Two Rivers with the girls who show up with Varen and Alana, who are being taken to the White Tower to become novices. And like we have Matt's sister, which becomes a bit of glue that binds this moment with the past, and so we get a little bit of that here, but they're just scenery. They because everything is revolving around Androl, who's this guy, random guy we've never met before. It just, this late in the book, to me, that makes no sense.
Yeah, and as things go forward with him becoming a pivotal character, you could have even had moments when we had the Loghain chapters in the Black Tower that brought him forward as a
Mm-hmm,
character.
mm-hmm.
And so, as a prominent member of Loghain's inner
Yeah,
circle.
why didn't, with that scene that we get with his two Aes Sedai that he bonded, we get that moment where this group of people come to him and are talking to Logain, and giving him information about what Taim is doing and everything. Why couldn't Androl have been one of those guys? Why
Hmm.
couldn't we have gotten his name and seen him being part of Logain's, cadre then? you know, just, it would have been a relatively simple setup for Jordan, which makes me wonder where Androl came from. Because we know that Nakomi, as we talked about last time, she came from the notes, but the character and the name were an invention of Sanderson, taking inspiration from the notes. So it makes me wonder,
If it
uh,
should have been one of the guys that was
yeah,
introduced earlier.
who, what was this intended to be someone else, or was this just, I need a guy here to do this thing, and Jordan figured he'd figure that out when he got there, and then it became up to Sanderson to make this character, and he didn't want to or didn't think to make it someone we already knew. I don't know.
Yeah. It might have said something to the extent of need this person, one of the Ashaman, and then
Yeah.
I mean that could be anybody, Oh, am I making up an Ashaman or am I using one we've already seen? I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. 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 It would have made for a difficult, logistically, it would have made it difficult. But the other thought I had was, you would have had to change a little bit of the backstory to make things work the way they're going to work going forward.
Hmm.
Um, but what if this was Abel?
I was actually thinking more Master Luon, since it's so parallel to Perrin's
Hmm.
way of thinking. Abel
Hmm.
would think more like Matt.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. But Abel also would, one of the things that Androl is needed for here is to be the reader's avatar, because he's savvy enough, because he's world wise enough to understand the currents here, understand the factions, but then also intuitively understand how to deal with them. Like when he's having to deal with Time's bully there,
Hmm.
he lets him bully him, and he kind of deflects things with a little bit of self-deprecating humor, and that is very Matt, and would be the kind of thing I could see Abel doing, is being able to deflect and being able to, I need to de-escalate this situation because it's going to turn out bad for us.
Hmm.
So let me do that. All right. And then finally we go back to Elaine. My head hurts. Um, so this was this was one of the scenes where I thought, this sounds like Sanderson. This feels like his words, like his scene. Uh, but it feels so much like something Jordan could have written. He probably would have used different words, used things a little bit differently, but overall, I thought this was a pretty good chapter. Um, However, one of the things that sticks in my craw, and again, I have to wonder, was Elaine supposed to start off as this, and Gawain too, when we first meet them, when Rand falls into the garden, and they're such atypical nobles, and so we're supposed to, oh, these are the good nobles. These are, yeah, she's still a noble, but she has all this empathy and sympathy, and blah blah blah. And then was she supposed to turn into someone unlikable? Because some of Elaine's comments here, when they start this meeting, they are annoying and make you go, God, Elaine, why are you being such a queen bee? But you could read them in a benefit of the doubt light until you get to page 698, uh where, well, let me back up to what Perrin says that makes her respond like this. um we'll muddle through, Perrin said in that stubborn tone he used when he wasn't going to budge. And this is Fail's point of view, so this is her thinking that. I'm not stepping down. You're doing a poor job of persuading me you will accept my authority, Elaine snapped. Her getting emotional and rude here, and fighting back, that can't be read in a beneficial light, except that she is, my line here is respect my authority, because that's what she's doing here.
Mm-hmm.
Respect my authority, Elaine snapped, is basically what she just did. Um, so like when she first starts this conversation, it's explain to me why I shouldn't have you executed. All right, that's queen bee stuff there, but you could at least understand that she's doing what she thinks she must do as queen rather than maybe what she wants to do as a person. But then the more that this goes on, the more unlikable I find Elaine in this scene. Um, and it's annoying. I didn't want to dwell on it too much because we'll gripe more about Elaine as we go through, because we've kind of already
Mm-hmm.
said one of the really unsatisfying things about Elaine is she never really learns her lesson, and we never really see a humbling. All right, stupid internet. Let's power through this before it completely craps out. What I was saying before I froze, Elaine is never really humbled, and I've compared this to what happens with Morghese, because she never really learns the lesson. Most notably, we see a moment of humility when Matt rescues her from the golem, but that never results really in a change of character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be a through line, unless I'm
Well,
misremembering.
it's
That's a
almost
through line
worse
to
than
the
if she
end.
just never had any of those moments,
Yes,
like after the Golem, because it's like that person that always says they're sorry, but they never change anything. I mean,
that's it exactly.
I
Yeah.
got in a little hot water with the ladies in the morning when I had the gym, because they were they're suburban moms. They were always late. And so they would come in and say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. And after like, I don't know, a year of that or 2 years, I finally said to one of them, I said, if you were really sorry, you'd change. And oh my goodness, that
And the
was.
whole room turns and looks at Sam,
Remember we talked about Fail and
and Morghese
Morghese
putting
having
aside their
that? Yeah,
differences to glare at Perrin. It's like, yep,
yep. I that
that's
was
Sam.
that was a room full of glares. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, but speaking of humbled, and then I think again, overanalyzing everything because there's so much, but I feel like it's not an accident that after this scene it switches to Fortuana Othem Devi Pendrag, ruler of the glorious Sanchin Empire. Um, not only does it switch to her and what Tuan is as a person, as a ruler, and that interesting contrast or lack thereof with Elaine, who's supposed to be the good guy. Um, but then I also like the way this scene ends. I don't have a lot of thoughts except the very end of it is the very last line is the White Tower was doomed. And I don't think it's an accident that we then immediately switch to Perrin going, uh, crap, where's it? Empress of the Sanchin, eh? Perrin said, watching the smoke twist above him in the dim room. Daughter of the Nine Moons, Matt said. It's different. And you're married, Perrin grinned. So I think that was a not so subtle way of saying, yeah, the White Tower isn't really doomed because Tuan seemingly has forgot that Matt is out there and Matt is going to be an influence on her.
Yeah.
But again, the scene in general, this scene works better for me, but it falls a little flat because the Badger scene was kind of silly and contrived. This is much more natural and better. The dialogue is better. I think it's also probably not an accident that we're in Perrin's point of view here and not Matt's, because that's just a lot easier for Sanderson to write. And probably one of the reasons it writes so much better is because we don't have these long stretches of Matt's internal thoughts. You know, one of the problems that we griped about with those first couple of chapters is Matt would say something that would be a little bit out of character, but then we would have 2 or 3 paragraphs of his internal thoughts that would just repeatedly beat that dead horse until it became absurd.
Mm-hmm.
It's the what he said was bad enough because it was a little bit out of character, but now inside his head we're way out of character here. And so I think that's probably one of the
Well,
reasons this
because
scene
we
works
also
better.
do separate the difference between what you say and what you think.
Mm-hmm.
And if he said something, you can always justify in your head, oh, he was just bantering or he was trying to deflect or any of these things. But when you go from that thing that was could have been justified, even though we think improperly said, to the thoughts reflecting it,
Yeah.
you're like, no, he meant to say that. Now you can't have that internal justification
All right.
of all the things you could talk yourself into why he would say that.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is all for today. Um, Next time we've got 2 chapters of Avienda actually going through Reread, which I'll see if anything comes to mind when I reread those before next week. But just thinking back on it, I don't know that I have a lot of thoughts for it, except that it's interesting. It's an interesting twist of what you were expecting going in, and I do think they're written well. So, but I don't recall having a ton of interesting thoughts about them, except those 2 chapters were pretty good.
Yeah, but the good news is with us, you can have a tangent thought and it take 2 hours. So,
Yeah, so we'll see if any tangents come to mind. But other than that, we will see y'all next week. We're going to talk a little more fitness stuff on Wednesday, and then who knows what else. Um, and
I'm
then
wanting to say there
Friday
was
we'll
some
see how.
stuff in the news that I really wanted to get on, but I'll have to look back through my playlist again because there has been so many things happening. But
True.
well,
Oh, I keep saying we're going to
20,
talk about that stupid law. So
27th, what day is that on? Okay, that's actually after we talk again. I was gonna say the
okay.
debate is gonna happen on the
Mm.
27th, but
All right, and we'll see what happens when it happens. But I was hoping to come down and go fishing next week because it looks like it's finally drying out on the coast.
like
So
what we'll talk about this after off
yeah,
air. Yeah.
so we'll see if there are any hiccups there, but we shouldn't have a problem getting 2 episodes out next week.
Okay.